Good evening. This is Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation, and I'm your host, Dr. Sundiata Keita Chajua. Today's guest is Professor Lou Turner. Professor Turner is Clinical Assistant Professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. He is also the former academic advisor for the Department of African American Studies, and Professor Turner was the research and policy and public policy director for the Chicago South Side Community Organization Developing Communities Project, and he did that work from 2000 to 2014. He is a board member of the African American Leadership and Policy Institute in Chicago, Illinois, and he is the principal investigator for the Hal Barron Digital Archival Research and Publication Project at the University of Illinois. He is a colleague of the late Hegelian Marxist philosopher Riya Grace. He has written extensively on Fanonian, Marxian, Hegelian dialectics. He is recognized as one of the foremost Fanonian scholars in the country and indeed in the world. Lou has edited News and Letters, a Marxist humanist newspaper, for a couple of decades. He is co-author of Fanon, Soweto, and American Black Thought. And with Dr. Helen Neville, he co-edited Fanon's Psychotherapeutic Approaches to Clinical Work with Marginalized Communities, which was published in 2021. Frantz Fanon, Soweto, and Black American Thought is one of those works that we all wish that we could write. It is a work that had a direct impact on the movement for liberation as it circulated in the anti-apartheid underground of the Black consciousness movement in South Africa. So let me say, bring Professor Turner. Okay. Excuse me. Dr. Turner, it's a pleasure to have you. You are the first person to appear twice on Real Talk.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And deservedly so for a variety of reasons, right? No doubt. So, Brother Lou, you were on July 8th, 2021. So it's been 2.5 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
2.5 years. You're one of my earliest guests, and I want to revisit some of the discussion that we had previously, right? And that was the discussion about who you are. So I want to reintroduce you to our audience. Let me click something here and see if I can. Okay, good. I think we got a bigger picture. Is there a way that you can raise your stature so that you kind of get as high as I am?
Yeah.
Okay, good, yeah. So,
it's been a long day. I was just relaxing a little bit.
hey, brother, I know. Like you, I think we got a month to go.
Yeah.
In terms of the semester.
But when you asked me to be on, it's ride or die, brother. So with you.
Hey, brother, I appreciate it, and and the same for you, ride or die. Absolutely. So I do want to get into some of your background for people who did not hear the July 8th, 2021 program. So as you know, I'm a devotee of Bill Cross's negrescence theory of Black identity formation, sometimes popularly referred to as the Negro to Black conversion process. So I want you to discuss the historical moment, the place where you spent your formative years and your family's class background. And if you could, well, what I'm really trying to get at is your radicalization and what I'm trying to think of the R&B artists who used the word blackenized. Right. How were you blackenized? If you can put those things right where you spent your formative years, the historical moment in which you experienced your formative years, and your parents' class background, if you can put that in the framework of Cross's Black identity development model, that would be wonderful.
Well, I come from a Black working class background in New Jersey. I come from a small town called Matawan, New Jersey, spelled the same way as the John Sayles movie, Matawan, about coal miners. My grandfather on my father's side actually was a coal miner. My father was a heavy equipment operator, drove bulldozers, pans, back-end loaders, those kinds of things, worked on big construction sites all over New Jersey and the New York area. During the summertime when I was away from college, I worked with him in construction as well, paving roads, laying pipe, sewer and water mains and things like that, and deep ditches and whatnot, where you're afraid of the dirt walls caving in on you. You got to work in a box. So so I did that kind of thing. Worked in factories as well when I was home from college. 1968 was my senior year in high school, and that was the year, of course, was the high point of the civil rights movement as it was transforming into the Black Power movement. And it was when Martin Luther King was assassinated. Actually, whatever the anniversary is next week, April 4th. I came to, I'd already heard about it before I came to school that day, and was truly upset that the school had not lowered the flag to half mast. And when I got into school, a lot of students, both Black and white, but it was mostly Black students. I went to an integrated school in New Jersey, on the Jersey Shore. And the principal and the staff, I guess they were waiting for some word from the district about what to do in response. So I led a walkout of students from the school because the school refused to lower the flag at half mast. We walked out of the school onto the grounds and stood out there until they lowered it. So that was one of my first actions or activities of that type. But it actually began with Black studies. My junior and senior year of high school had some sympathetic teachers who were white, actually. One was Greek woman, and another one was a Jewish English teacher. And they had after school classes for any Black students who were interested in Black studies. So that was because there wasn't any formal Black studies in school. It was 1968. That summer, after I graduated, I spent the summer out in Los Angeles. And
what took you to LA?
Huh?
Why'd you go to LA?
My mother was living out there by then.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd gone out there my junior year, but this was my senior year. I had a 4-year scholarship to Cornell University, but I turned it down because I wanted to go to Howard because there was a Black student movement at Howard. So I went to Howard where I paid and turned down a 4-year ride to Cornell. And I arrived in Washington, D.C. That fall, a little early, I guess August, maybe beginning of September, that fall, late summer, early fall. And took a cab in from, I think it's called Dulles Airport. It's way out in the country. I thought it was near the city.
Yeah. It was called Dulles back in the day. Yeah.
And so drove into the city and up to Howard. gee, I forget the name of the hill. It's called the Hill. Howard University is up on the hill.
Right,
But took a cab in there, but drove through the community, and you could see. I mean, or I could see, the buildings that had been burned down. I mean, just blackened embers and whatnot. It's almost like you could still see the smoke coming off of them, man. It was so. On the one hand, there was that driving into Howard through the Black community and seeing the remnants of the rebellion in response to King. On the other hand, a few other students of mine, because some of my buddies from high school also went to Howard, and we went out to the mall, to Washington Monument Mall, to the tent city.
Ah, okay. So Poor People's Campaign is going on.
Yeah, it's going on. And man, what people don't tell you, a lot of people, there's not a lot of discussion about that moment. That was King's last organizing.
Right.
And, after, he went to Memphis to solidarize with the sanitation workers, which is where he was assassinated. But the Poor People's Campaign did go on. And it was I remember it being a very sad picture, because when we went out there, it was raining, so it was mud in this tent city, and poor people were just out there, kind of just in these tents that they set up on the mall in all this mud, and it was like everyone had forgotten them. There weren't any major public officials. There were certainly a few Black congressmen, but there weren't any movement leaders or anything like that out there. It was a pretty depressing. I remember it being a pretty depressing situation, a rather depressing moment. So,
look, can you describe who were the poor people? I know King sought to bring a rainbow coalition of people across nationality. Right, he was looking for a multinational, multiracial, working class base. So what did the poor people, the people participating in the campaign look like? How many are we talking about?
Well, from what I can both recall, and I don't want to your memory starts playing all kinds of tricks on you at this point, but I just do remember that certainly I saw a lot of Black people. Didn't see that many white people. I saw some. And I don't know, it's hard to extrapolate whether they were from Appalachia or anything like that, but there certainly were poor white people there. But it was mostly Black people that I saw, under umbrellas, in tents, in the mud, and the tents were on the ground. I just remember a lot of mud, and I remember being a rainy day. So those are the two images I have of my first weeks at Howard, driving in and still seeing the remnants of the rebellion, and also going out to the mall, and seeing the remnants of that last campaign, of the Poor People's Campaign of King. I don't know how rainbow it was, at least what I saw, but I don't know that there's been much attention paid to that moment. It seemed to characterize the kind of moment of mourning of King, of the King assassination. It was pretty depressing. I remember feeling, effectively, a feeling of depression out at the mall at the tent city. So one of the things that happened while I was the main thing that happened, I was in the theater department, the drama department at Howard, and
come upstairs, please. I don't know. Excuse me, Lil. Just get him out of here, please. All right, so go ahead, Lou. I apologize, man. My dogs are bad.
It was interesting because being at Howard was a Black Power moment in many ways, not just nationally, but internationally. And it was a Black Power moment in terms of Black studies. The movement was still going on. The student movement was still going on. The year before, when I was a high school senior, I saw what we call it now PBS documentary on the movement at Howard. And actually, it was both. There was a documentary, and then there was a docudrama, and they both were on the New York version of PBS. And that was the reason why I went to Howard. Decided to go to Howard. And so some of the people who were in the documentary I met. They were upperclassmen. I was a freshman, but the movement was still going on. Then the year '67 was a year of mostly civil disobedience by students and whatnot. The year I was there, it ratcheted up because students burned down the ROTC building and then burned down the fire engine that came to put out the fire. The police invaded the campus and shot tear gas into my dorm. I was staying in Douglas Hall. We had to evacuate the dorm I was staying in because the police, cordoned off the campus, invaded the campus, shot tear gas into the dorm I was staying, and I assume they thought that was some kind of hotbed and whatnot, but it was Douglas Hall. We had to evacuate the dorm, and I was stage managing a play. I may have told you this story. I staged
you did.
Managing a play was a senior student's directing kind of final exam, and it was a Langston Hughes play. Life is Simply Heavenly. The campus is going up in flames, and the play was going on called Life is Simply Heavenly. Simply had to do with, of course, the character that Langston Hughes created. Just be simple. And so I wrote a bunch of columns for like Chicago Defender and other Black newspapers about this character, Jesse Be Simple, or Just Be Simple. And so he also wrote a play called Life is Simply Heavenly. And this poor directing student stages this play, and the Ira Aldrich Theater, place is packed with all, Howard University administrators, the elite, ambassadors, because it's Washington, D.C., so you have Black ambassadors and whatnot, or consul people and whatnot, and with furs and all kinds of stuff. I remember E. Franklin Frazier's wife was there wearing a fur. And so E. Franklin Frazier wrote Black Bourgeoisie, and Harold Cruz told me the reason why he wrote Black Bourgeoisie. I was at a conference at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor years after, and we're just standing out in the hall at this conference talking, shooting the breeze. And so Cruz has all these stories. So he says, E. Franklin Frazier wrote that book, Black Bourgeoisie, because he was so damn tired of his wife's bridge club coming over to the house playing bridge. And so that's who it was about, was the Black Bourgeoisie, was his wife's bridge club. And so he had passed away by then, but she came to this play, and I could see exactly what
motivated it.
Anyway, the play is going on, and just before the intermission, these two brothers walk down the aisle carrying rifles and ammunition belts across the front of the, and this is like, I think it was in the winter, fall going into winter. They jump up on the stage, cock the rifles, and say, the play is over. I'm the stage manager, so I'm in control. Once the play starts, the director's no longer in control. It's in control of the stage manager. I was a stage manager. I was a freshman, lowly freshman. I let down the curtain. The graduate student director runs back. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? I said, the man said the play is over. So that was what was going on at Howard. There was a guy by the name of Paul Carter Harrison, who was professor of theater and playwriting, who wrote a great play called Tabernacle. And it was about the 1964 New York rebellion. This is
Mm.
before Watts. It's a year before.
Right, 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 right.
Nobody talks about the 1964 Harlem Rebellion and whatnot, where a white cop shoots
Right, right.
a black teenager. And so Paul wrote this play called Tabernacle, and it was really, really innovative. And so there was this big scaffolding set design. It was scaffolding. And so the play was taking place on different levels, but at the kind of the middle level of the scaffolding, there was a jazz combo playing live jazz,
Mm.
and it was a classmate of mine. He was a senior, as a freshman, called Eric Cravat, and Eric was a drummer, and he actually had been in that docudrama of the year before that I saw on PBS. He's also an actor, been a drummer. Later on, Eric played drums for Miles Davis.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it was a really great play. Anyway, so it was Tabernacle was first stage at Howard University. Then they moved it down to the Howard Theater down the street, down the hill, into the community. And a damn riot broke out in the theater.
Wow.
I mean, it was wild, man. That was the kind of moment that was going on. So you had this incredible mixture of Black student movement, Black studies, and I'll come back to the Black studies part, and Black arts. The Black studies part has to do with this. Wait, let me get, because I'll forget it. One of the few professors who solidarized with us was Nathan Hare, taught sociology.
Yeah.
They fired him.
That's right. That's right.
He goes out to San Francisco State and starts the first Black Studies program. And what was one of the demands we had at Howard? Crazy as it sounds, to have Black Studies at a Black university.
Yeah.
And so they fire Hare. He goes out and starts the first Black Studies program at San Francisco State.
And then starts the next year Black Studies.
Right. That's exactly right. So all of those things, I mean, people say Black Power. There's a confluence of a lot of different things going on. You know, so it was certainly Black Power in terms of politics. There was Black arts. There was Black studies in these moments, and they were all coming together. And when Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Mexico City Olympics first held up the raised fist, when they got kicked out of the Olympics for doing that, and they flew back home, they flew into DC, the first place they came to was Howard University. It was a big mass rally on the quad. And Tommy Smith and John Carlos were in support of John Smith and Tommy Smith and John Carlos, and they were there. And so Howard had this cross currents of things. And that's why I say to this day, the only year to be at Howard University is 1968-69, because Howard was bougie as hell before that and whatnot. And so my class was like one of the first working class classes to really come to Howard, because Howard is typical of, unfortunately, Black institutions. They typically follow white institutions.
Right.
So like Columbia University started open admissions, because and that's when a lot of working class people started getting into colleges and whatnot. And so Howard followed suit and started accepting kids that typically would not be accepted at Howard, and I was one of them.
Wow, that's an amazing story, and I've heard part of it before. Now I want to.
By the way, and that's when I first started reading Fanon.
Okay, I want to come back to that, but I want to get you there, and I'm going to ask you to be a bit more succinct. Okay? So, still, I'm introducing you to the audience, right? So I want to revisit a question from our July 8th, 2021 dialogue. Okay. And that concerns the fact that you consider yourself, you are a Marxist humanist.
Right.
Now, the typical politicized and engaged activist in the Black liberation movement doesn't know what the hell a Marxist humanist is. So can you tell us what is that? And can you unpack its genealogy? Who were its leaders? Where does it come from? What movements does it come from? What are the organizational formations? And most importantly, what were the most significant interventions into the Black liberation movement and in the movement for human emancipation?
Right. Well, the first thing you got to do is you have to have a palate cleanser for your mind, man. You got to clear out a lot of mess to be able to even get to that, because there's a lot of debris, a lot of ideological debris on Marxism first. And so you asked me, where does it come from? It comes from Marx. And that the Marx is what's called the Economic Philosophic Manuscripts of 1844. Marx calls his philosophy a thoroughgoing naturalism or humanism. It's the only name he ever gave to it. It was Engels who called it historical materialism after Marx died, and it was the Russian philosopher Plekhanov who called it dialectical materialism. That's where those two terms. It doesn't mean that Marxism isn't that.
Right. But that wasn't the term that Marx himself gave the philosophy.
Right.
So
he's now.
But what is it?
It originates from the those 1844 essays of the young Marx. That is, there's a set of, I don't know, it must be like 9 essays. One of them is called Alienated Labor. Another one is called Private Property and Communism. A third one, the last one, is called The Critique of the Hegelian Dialectic. There's several other ones on landed property, exchange, but the alienated labor one was central to Marx's political economy, that labor under capitalism is alienated.
How is that? How is
it alienated? Because that labor becomes a commodity. It is exchanged. You sell your labor for a wage. So it is a commodity. Your labor, your human labor power, as Marx later would call it, is a commodity that you sell. It is alienated from you. Marx talked about 4 forms of alienation, both in these 1844 essays, but also in the 1846 German ideology, where he lays out the thing that's most near and dear to you, which is the materialist conception of history. That he does lay out in German ideology. And so, but there's 4 forms of alienation. The worker is alienated from the commodity, from the product that he creates. He's alienated from his own labor because he sells it. His labor is a commodity that he sells. Thirdly, he's alienated from other workers by the division of labor in under capitalism. And then the 4th one is a little bit more difficult to get, but I think this is where issues of race come in. He talks about species alienation. We're alienated from ourselves as a human species.
Now explain why you say race comes in here.
Well, because the history of the idea of race originates in Enlightenment, actually pre-Enlightenment figures who attempted to, like Linnaeus, attempted to classify and categorize the natural world, fauna and flora, plants and animals. And at the height of that is the human species, Homo sapiens sapiens. And then the idea of create that there are these different so-called species or subspecies, which they are not, called races. And so I suspect that that's what's also implied there. But there is these different forms of alienation that result from the capitalist mode of production.
Okay, so your organization, I mean, get me to the organizational form and get me to how what you just laid out philosophically becomes relevant to the Black liberation movement and to the overall struggle for human emancipation.
The organization, as you know, was started by Raya Dunayevskaya, who was my mentor. She, CLR James, and Grace Lee Boggs constituted something called the Johnson Forest tendency, or the state capitalist tendency, within the Trotskyist movement. That is to say, they felt that Russia or the Soviet Union was not a communist society, but was a state capitalist society. It was a new stage of capitalism. The New Deal in the United States was state capitalism as well.
Okay, pull back.
Okay.
Some of our people are familiar with these concepts, right? So I need you to do two things for me. One, I need you to go back and say who Raya Dunayevskaya is as a person.
Okay.
CLR is as a person,
Right.
and who Grace Lee Boggs is as a person. And then I want you to come back and explain the theory of state capitalism, but I want you to be succinct.
Okay.
Okay.
Raya was a Russian Marxist, immigrated with her family as a young woman to the United States in 1920, I think. She was originally from Ukraine and came from a Jewish family. And also when she was a young person in Ukraine, then Russia, Ukraine, belonged to what's called the Pioneers. The Pioneers was a Bolshevik organization for youth, or the young pioneers. So she was the Bolshevik. And that's my genealogy.
Now, did she have a direct relationship with Lenin? Did she act as his secretary at one?
No, she was the secretary to Trotsky.
Okay, she was Trotsky's secretary.
Right.
In Mexico, right?
In Mexico.
Okay.
Because her family immigrates to Chicago. And the center of the Marxist movement was in Chicago, it wasn't in New York.
Right.
They don't move to New York to 1928.
And the center of the Black Marxist movement was
exactly right.
Not New York.
Exactly right. And so Raya, as a teenager in high school, saw the Black people being dogged out, their homes being burned down, and she saw those pogroms. In fact, she was the first person I heard use the term pogrom to describe anti-Black, white anti-Black violence as a pogrom. Anyway, she belonged to the early, she was an original member of the Communist Party. This was
so the 1921 founding, she's there. Yeah,
she's there. Lenin dies in January 1924, and the leaders of the party in Chicago move to recognize Stalin as the leader. And she said, "Wait a minute, why don't we wait to get the wire from Russia about who is the leader?" Because it wasn't clear at the time. It wasn't even clear then that it was going to be Stalin, but there were supporters of Stalin in the thing. Anyway,
not to go that deep because I got you. You got to move on to CLR. And
but I just want to get you so you can see how she ended up down in Mexico.
Okay.
So there were some people. It wasn't Stalinism at the time, but people who disagreed with her, raising this objection, threw her down 2 flights of stairs.
Oh shit.
Oh yeah. I mean, the stuff that Richard Wright writes about, of the Stalinists and the Communist Party, that was real. She and CLR became friends of Wright later on. But and so it was with that, she said she felt she had to find out what the hell this Trotsky guy was about. And so she hitchhiked from Chicago down to Mexico. Trotsky was living in Diego Rivera's house.
The great muralist.
The great Mexican muralist.
Who had a relationship with Frida Kahlo.
That's right. And so that's where he was living with his wife, I think in a couple years, Stalin ended up assassinating his son, and ultimately assassinating him. But Riya was one of his three secretaries. He had an English secretary, a French secretary, and a Russian secretary. And Riya was his Russian secretary. He was always impressed with Riya's Russian, that she spoke so well. And so, so she's there working in the compound for Trotsky, and the depression is going on. Hitler is rising in Germany, and what occurs in what they call the big politics, global politics, is that Stalin signs a non-aggression pact with Hitler.
Right, right.
And shocks everyone.
Trotsky, black people, when he signs that, is at the same time he's actually given oil to the Italians who have invaded Ethiopia.
Right, exactly.
And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of black folk who try to, in fact, I think the number is close to 10,000 African Americans who attempt to sign up and go to Ethiopia to fight to defend Ethiopia from.
When Riya was living in New York later on, she was one of the main organizers of support for Ethiopia up in Harlem. But anyway, Trotsky still wanted to maintain that Russia was a worker state, though degenerate. He always thought that with Stalin, it was a degenerate worker state. He still wanted to defend the Soviet Union, Stalin's Soviet Union, after Stalin signed the non-aggression pact, which greenlit the Second World War, because then Hitler invaded Poland. So, and she says, there's no fucking way, excuse my language, I don't know if you can say, there's no way that that's a worker state. And so she wrote a statement saying, that she was breaking with Trotsky, and somebody else had written a statement, and they both used the same pseudonym, Johnson. The other Johnson was CLR James. CLR had the same position or a similar position.
Give me James in less than 90 seconds, Lou.
CLR James was a Trinidadian Marxist, wrote a famous book on the topic we may or may not get to, on the Haitian Revolution, called Black Jacobins, yes. Mostly focused on Toussaint Louverture, but it was a Marxist treatment of the Haitian Revolution. Riya always contended, because that James had used as his model for Black Jacobins Trotsky's history of the Russian Revolution.
Yeah. A lot of people make the argument, but also now Black Jacobins was a history of the Haitian Revolution, but it was meant to be a blueprint, right, for African decolonization.
Right. And it's important. Somebody should do a class on Black Jacobins as a Marxist text and Black Reconstruction as a Marxist text.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it really, it was that kind of Marxist historiography that was coming in.
If you look at the table of contents, you know that they're outlined basically the same way.
Oh, okay.
No. James starts with the enslaved population. Then he breaks down and he does the so-called mulattoes. Then he goes to the whites, and he got the big whites, which is simply the large plantation owners, the capitalism, and then he's got the small whites, the small farmers, right? Du Bois starts with the black worker, right? Then he goes to the white plantation owners, and then he goes to white workers. I mean, it's the same. The table of contents is basically the same, and there's no connection between Du Bois and James at that time. It's simply that they both are working with Marxist categories.
Right.
Yeah.
Who's the famous librarian? Who wrote a very nice, really,
Bontemps?
huh?
Arna Bontemps?
No, it was somebody else. Anyway, he wrote a really interesting essay on Black historiography, and he makes a claim: there's Black history before Woodson and then after Woodson.
I
But
know
then
you're
he
talking
starts writing about Black Reconstruction.
Michael Winston?
No.
Winston? Okay, well, never mind.
Anyway.
Let's not speculate. Let's keep moving.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so James Johnson, who was CLR James, and Riya, who was Johnson, they both had the same pseudonym. That's why Riya changed her name to Forrest.
Okay.
And CLR kept the name Johnson. So they created the Johnson-Forrest tendency. That's where that came. But they both had submitted these political theses about why Russia was not a worker state, given Stalin's non-aggression pact with Hitler, which again gave the green light to World War II. It was the beginning of World War II.
And so the book that comes out of that is State Capitalism.
Right.
By
Exactly.
CLR. That's the famous work.
Right.
But it's actually a work of the Johnson-Forrest tendency.
Yeah, Riya was the economist.
CLR and Grace Lee Bob. Well, she's Grace Lee then.
Right, she's Grace Lee. Riya did the original economic analysis of Russia's first 3 5-year plans. Russia had 5-year plans. And so Riya, since it was in Russian, there was a diplomat who smuggled the data out under diplomatic pouch, in a diplomatic pouch. And that's how she got the data of the 5-year plans. And so she did the analysis of the 5-year plans and showed or demonstrated that the law of value and surplus value operated in quote unquote Soviet Russia just as it did in the United States. So she made the economic argument. CLR made the political argument.
All right, we're getting deeper than I want because I do want to get through this. Okay. We got some big questions at the end, Lou.
Okay.
So that's right. And so the organization that you're in, what's the name of it? And tell me about News and Letters and U.S.
Yeah, it's News and Letters Committees. And the thing you asked about the humanism of Marx, Riya was the first to translate Marx's humanist essays, as they're called, the 1844 humanist essays into English. She was also the first to translate Lenin's philosophic notebooks on Hegel's science of logic, on the dialectic, into English. And so those were the two texts, Marx's 1844 essays, Lenin's philosophic notebooks on the dialectic. Those are the two founding texts of the Johnson-Forrest tendency, along with the analysis of Russia's state capitalism. And so Riya, Grace, and CLR are together. They break from the Trotskyist movement.
The Workers' Party.
Huh?
The Workers' Party.
The Workers' Party. And so they're together until I think they're together for like 3 or 4 years. They create the organization is called Correspondence Committees. The newspaper is called Correspondence, which is the thing that, that's what the Correspondence Committee does. What's what Angela's doing now.
Right.
But that's where it came from.
Angela doesn't have the same analysis.
No. But they ripped off the name. Yeah, they just ripped off the name. Yes. But the idea of correspondence, and then later on News and Letters, comes from the American Revolution.
Right.
See, because one of the things that they were trying to do, a major thing that they were trying to do, was to develop the American roots of Marxism.
Right.
Okay, right. And Marxism isn't some foreign doctrine, blah, blah, blah. It has American roots, and those roots, my dear brother, are Black.
Yeah.
You asked where the Black thing come in.
Okay, now let's do the Black thing, and I want you to take the text that Riya issues in, what is it, 63? The centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation.
Right. American Civilization on Trial.
On trial. Okay.
Right. Get Black masses as vanguard.
Get us there in a succinct way. Succinctness is what we value today.
I gave a talk a few years back over here at the church where the that restaurant in the basement is and whatnot on Marx in the Black World, and it
Yeah,
was all
yeah, yeah.
these old
I was there.
professors and whatnot. And so I gave this analysis and whatnot. So they said, so somebody asked, well, the first question, so you know, so what is your view of Marxism in relationship to the Black struggle? And I said simply, I have the same view as Marx.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's like,
Who asked you?
it's just like I was making up some, you know, they thought I was making something up. And then I just brought receipts, you
That's
know,
right.
chapter and verse. I mean, the 1846 Wage, Labor, and Capital. What is a Negro? A man of the Black race. Only under certain production relations does he become a slave.
That's right.
Because there was that saying Negro was synonymous with slave.
Right. Right.
Marx says no, a Negro is a man of the Black race. Only under certain production or only in certain production relations does he become a slave. He's no more a slave than sugar is the price of sugar. He's a man. He's a man of the Negro.
Right. Yeah.
So beginning there, and that's the young Marx. Wage,
Yeah.
Labor, and Capital, 1846, and all the way through the stuff. I mean, the Civil War impacted Marx's writing of Capital. He's writing Capital
Right.
during the Civil War is when the first Working Men's International is created in response to the Civil War. When the British working class prevented the British bourgeoisie siding with the South.
Right. And Marx played a major role.
In
putting together those mass meetings.
Right.
Forced British royalty and British capital not to endorse and side with the South.
Right.
So people, I shouldn't say people forget because they never knew.
They never knew.
They don't
and just think what would have happened.
Marx. Right.
Just think what would have happened had that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so we got that.
So we got that. And then Capital is infused with the Black dimension, and because he wrote it during the time of the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, he continues to write about it when Andrew Johnson becomes the president after Lincoln is assassinated, and the first Civil Rights Act, the 1866 Civil Rights Act, he vetoes it.
That's right.
The 1866, he vetoes it. It's in response to the veto of the 1866 Civil Rights Act that the radical Republicans say, well, okay, we'll get you. And they developed the 14th Amendment, which is, in my view, arguably the most important amendment in the Constitution.
Now, remember, parts of the 14th Amendment is in the 1866
That's exactly right.
There's a veto.
That's right. And so that was their response. But Marx writes a letter to Andrew Johnson warning him not to veto. He writes the letter in the name of the First International. And he says, if you deny them, I got this memorized. And I found this, by the way, in Du Bois's Black Reconstruction. Du Bois is the only one who had this thing, man. So this letter from Marx to Andrew Johnson in the name of the First International. He says, if you deny them, Black people, citizens' rights, while you exact from them citizens' duties, you will once more plunge your country into war.
And I mean, you know, but not only did Marx write to Johnson, basically telling him, don't do this foolishness you're about to do with your racist ass, but he's also writing to Lincoln during the Civil War and telling Lincoln, right? Doesn't he say to Lincoln, one Black regiment?
Right. He writes he actually writes that to Engels, but he writes to Lincoln something more important. Again, he writes to Lincoln. This is also in Black Reconstruction. What he writes to Lincoln is very fascinating. He says he's critical of the white working class. Marx is of the North. And that's why these Marxists are so crazy. I mean, so-called Marxists. He lays into him. He says, while the white working class of the North never came to, thought it was their privilege to sell their hide to their master and not support the emancipation of Black workers, and thus they could never come to the support of their brethren in Europe who were fighting for the 8-hour day. the abolitionist movement, which he supported, blah blah blah. But he's critical of the white working class for not getting behind the emancipation of black labor. He writes that Engels was a military tactician. His nickname was the General, because they had a division of labor, and Engels mostly wrote on military matters and whatnot. And so Engels was very pessimistic, and he had reason to be, about the way the Civil War was going. Because remember, the early years, they had that foolishness with that general and whatnot, and they were losing. Right. And frankly, the South had the better generals. You're fighting on their ground and whatnot, and the North was losing. And
that's the North was also fighting with their hands tied. But okay, right. I'm going to wrap that up. Let's go to Fanon.
Okay.
Okay. You are a foremost Fanonian scholar. So I want to go at you. I want to raise some questions with you. And so let's begin with Black Skin, White Mask. And the first chapter is the Black Man and Language.
Yeah.
And Fanon makes this argument. I want to quote. He says, all colonized people, in other words, people in whom an inferiority complex has taken root, who's committed to the gray, whose local cultural originality has been committed to the grave, position themselves in relation to the civilizing language, i.e. the metropolitan culture. Now he describes this as an act of whitening, right? Mm-hmm. And he goes on to posit that he says, to speak a language is to appropriate, to speak a language is to appropriate its world and culture.
Right, its worldview.
He then goes on to contend that pidgin and creolized languages, which some people call dialects, that it ties the colonized to a caricature, to a racist stereotype. And so he argues that it is necessary to teach the Black man not to be a slave to their archetypes. So can you explicate that from the general colonial context? In fact, actually, Fanon is talking about the Antilles when he's making that argument. Can you apply it to the African-American U.S. context?
Wow.
Well, brother, it ain't wild for you.
There's a lot to unpack there. You always want something succinct. The first thing is obviously the inferiority complex, and he goes into language as kind of the first kind of realm or space or domain in which that first appears. He identifies, and he associates this with Richard Wright, by the way. He identifies some of the first resistance to colonialism and to the inferiority complex created by colonialism to writers.
To writers?
To writers, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In other words, when you look at the writing, the essays, the novels, and whatnot, very often they are a resistance to a protest against white civilization, white arts and letters, in which those white arts and letters have caricatures of Black people. Film was one of this. You'll love this, Sundiata. Film was one of Fanon's favorite things. There's nothing that I know is written about film and Fanon. No, it's crazy. There's film throughout Black Skin, White Mask. When he was a psychiatrist in Algeria and Tunisia, it was one of the things he did for patients with film night and whatnot. But there's just films going throughout Black Skin, White Mask and whatnot. And so film and cinema were very, very important. I wrote a piece on Wright and Fanon some years ago, and one of the things I took up is Fanon and Wright on film. Richard Wright was into film into cinema as well. But they were into film. And so Fanon has one of the characterizations Fanon has in Black Skin, White Mask is, and it's interesting. It's an interesting test. He talks about how sitting in a theater, in a movie theater, and you're a Black person and you're just waiting for that Black character to come on, and you slump down into your seat.
Yeah.
But watch this. This is where the thought experiment comes in. He creates this thought experiment of a theater filled with Black people. Okay, either in France or in Martinique or the Antilles or whatnot, a theater filled with Black people, where the same film comes on, where there's a Black caricature, character and whatnot, filled with Black. The audience is Black. What is the response of the audience? The audience begins laughing, and dismissing and resisting the caricature.
Right.
And he says, you're in a theater and it's predominantly white. Same film comes on. What does if you're Black and you're sitting in it, you slide into your chair. And so what are those two experiences saying? And so I think you have to look at this question of caricature in that context, that it's the way Black people are amongst themselves, and then the way Black people are when they're in mixed company with white people.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Now, so Fanon sees colonialism as a totalizing project, right? And what I was struck by in Black Skin and White Mask is his use of the term that colonialism is a psychological economic structure.
Right.
Okay. Now, what I want you to do is connect colonialism as a psychological economic structure to Fanon's emphasis on Blackness, and where he talks about the epidermal nature of Blackness. Mm-hmm. So anti-Black racism, right? So he's talking about the epidermal character of race, and anti-Black racism is structured into the colonization of Afro-descendant people. So unpack that link between the psychological economic structure and anti-Black racism.
Fanon is different than Du Bois. This is often a mistake made. Fanon is different than Du Bois. Du Bois talks about double consciousness, double. Fanon talks about triple. So he identifies Black epidermality, your Black, your appearance, history. You're made to be a part of, all the history that white people have made of you. And then there is a third, which has to do kind of with your social existence being a caricature. So he has this kind of three layers of epidermality, that is simply your biological, physiological appearance, your phenotype. Your
schematic image.
Right. And then there's history, and then there is social existence. So they're related, Du Bois and Fanon, but they've constructed a different dialectic.
Yeah.
But they're both right, But Fanon is a psychiatrist. That's what he is trained as. And I mean, Du Bois was really an historian. Mostly people identify him as a sociologist. So he's really a socialist. So he's coming at it from his perspective, from his disciplinary perspective. Right. But Fanon is coming at it mostly by critiquing the various schools of psychology. I mean, Fanon is doing battle with white Western psychology. Fanon, too, has a humanism. He talks about a new humanism. Both Fanon and Marx talk about humanism. By humanism, they do not mean Enlightenment humanism. They both talk about a new humanism, a revolutionary humanism, that is a critique of Enlightenment Western humanism.
Because Enlightenment humanism gives us racism.
Right, it's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say about that. But Fanon is there's a lot to be said about his work on cinema. In Fanon's work, I raise this question kind of.
Does he discuss cinema beyond black skin, white mask? Where else does it appear in Fanon's?
He does talk about it in Wretched of the Earth, but it's really as a play. He has a whole play in Wretched of the Earth. It's a fantastic play, but it was also made into a film as well. In the section on the first chapter in Wretched on concerning violence, he has a lot on culture. There was an essay, a talk he gave at the first Congress of Negro Writers and Artists in 1956 called Racism and Culture, and he talks about film there as well. There's a famous film, I remember seeing this as a kid, it was actually a rerun, called Home of the Brave. It's an American film. Yeah, and it takes place in a military hospital.
Hospital. It's one of the what they call racial liberal films of the 1950s.
That's right. And so, but Fanon talks about the film in Black Skin, White Mask. And the one of the white patients, an amputee, tells the black patient who's suffering from being shell shocked and racism. The white amputee tells the black patient, he says, you need to get used to your disability the way I got used to my disability as an amputee. So he's identifying being an amputee with racism.
But let me
Fanon critiques it, to be sure.
No, let me build this back for 1 minute. Now, wasn't he, or there must be another patient who's blind and becomes best friends with the black guy, and he doesn't know he's black.
Right.
And when he's told he's black, he reacts in a racist way.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, you remember it, right?
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating thing because Fanon actually had spent time in a military hospital because he was in World War II and he got injured. And I think that was that. The original play, the film was originally a play on Broadway, and it wasn't about black, it was about anti-Semitism. There wasn't a black character in the play.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's interesting because the film, the doctor, the psychiatrist is Jewish. But in the original play on Broadway, the patient, the main protagonist, is Jewish, and he's talking about, he's a GI, and he's talking about suffering, anti-Semitism in the army. But that's the original. I looked it up, and that was what it's about.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, you created this term. I think this is your term, right? Ethno-psychiatry?
No, that's Fanon's.
So that's Fanon's term, decolonize ethno-psychiatry. So in the article that you have in the book that you and Helen Neville, my partner, did called Frantz Fanon's psychotherapeutic approaches to clinical work, you've got a chapter entitled Psychiatry Has to Be Political. And you talk about Fanon's notion of a decolonized ethno-psychiatry. And so what I want you to do is tell, what is that?
There was something
significant.
There was something called the Algiers School of Psychiatry. The Algiers School of Psychiatry. That was one version of it. Another version of it was psychiatrists who work for the United Nations, for the World Health Organization, who were racist as hell. The guy who was the founder of the Algiers School of Psychiatry was a racist Frenchman colonizer as well. And they both identified this, I forget the guy at WHO, World Health Organization, but Fanon jacks both of these guys up, but they both called their psychiatry ethno-psychiatry. And so psychiatry for colonized subaltern populations.
Okay.
And so ethno-psychiatry. I mean, it is a thing, as such, but that's what he's doing. He's decolonizing psychiatry. So Fanon is really an anti-psychiatry psychiatrist. And there's a whole thing, there's a whole postmodernist thing about anti-psychiatry, psychiatry, and some of them claim Fanon as their, some of these postmodernists claim Fanon for that as well. But Fanon was very revolutionary in what he did, of opening up the clinic doors and letting patients out who had been essentially imprisoned and creating all kinds of programs for them. But the psychiatry has to be political comes from one of his first experiments in Algiers, where he attempts to apply very, very progressive psychiatric practice on a Muslim men's ward in Algiers. And he learned something called sociotherapy from this progressive radical psychiatrist in France, was his mentor. Guy by the name of Tesquales had been involved in the Spanish Civil War and the Revolution. He was a radical, had to escape from, the fascists in Spain and then come. But the thing is, so he learns this, so it's very progressive therapy. Fanon applies it to a Muslim men's ward and it fails. And I call it a creative failure. And so I think Fanon knew it was going to fail. And the thing was, even a progressive liberal psychiatric practice could not work out of its cultural context.
Yeah.
And so that's when somebody asked him, well, what, how would he summarize, the experiment, the failure? He says, well, psychiatry has to be political. In other words, what he showed was that, Algeria was a colonized society, and that just imposing some French psychiatric practice would not work. It lacked the cultural competency that you needed to actually meet. So he rearranged the clinic. He created a Moorish cafe for the men, these Muslim men, to meet, because they come in there after work, sit there, drink coffee, listen to the radio. Fanon has this whole thing about the radio. So he created a cultural milieu that Muslim men and women, because there are women patients as well, that they would feel. They brought in Muslim storytellers, these
culturally relevant.
Yeah, so made it culturally relevant, but he created that. All that stuff that we talk about now, about cultural relevance, cultural competency, liberation psychology, that's all Fanon, man.
No, absolutely. As you know, I'm married to Helen.
Yeah, I
know. Good friends with Bill Cross. They kind of keep me straight. But I want to move to the overtly political writings. And so I want to talk principally about Wretched of the Earth and a Dying Colonialism. And I want to go back to your piece. Psychiatry has to be political, that you took as a quote from Fanon. There you argue that a decolonized ethno-psychiatry contributed to the creation of a new reality. That's what Fanon says, right? To create a new reality. And that new reality is politically independent, but actually independent in quotes, but actually what Nkrumah called neo-colonial, right? A neo-colonial state. So focusing on chapter 4 of Wretched of the Earth on national culture, you make this argument in psychiatry has to be political. You say that nationalist consciousness must be quickly transformed into social consciousness. And so I guess to some extent, my question is, if that doesn't happen, you end up with Haiti today?
You're right. You end up in neocolonialism.
Okay, so break it apart, because we have a strong nationalist tendency, and I even see some comments against some anti-Marxist comments in the chat. So explain why, if you are going to create a liberated society, one must move from national to social consciousness.
When Fanon was talking about the new reality, it was the new reality of the nation. That was in Dying Colonialism. And what he was showing in the first famous chapter is on Algeria Unveiled. It was on women in the revolution.
Go ahead and break it down, because there may be some people who haven't read it. So when it says unveiled, that's a double entendre.
Right. You can get a sense of it in the film The Battle of Algiers, which was obviously very influenced by Fanon. If you ever see the film The Battle of Algiers, a lot of it centers around women and the lowering of the veil, putting back on the veil, because they were part of the revolutionary movement. But he traces that. But what he was showing is that revolution is a dialectical process. Right within the breakup of the old is the creation of a new society. It's what same thing with social movements. The Montgomery bus boycott, think about it. It was a boycott that was based on the idea of people organizing a new form of transportation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so in order to fight, you have to create something new. It isn't just what you're against, it's what you're creating in the very process of something new. That's the dialectic. That's the dialectics of liberation that some of the folks that we know try to talk about, but don't know what it means. But we'll leave it alone.
We'll leave it alone.
Yeah, leave it alone. But there's just two things. And I think I realized after reading Wretched of the Earth over many, many times that there is a section in what you just referenced. Fanon
in chapter 4?
Yeah, chapter 4. Okay. Fanon warns that it was nationalism that got us here. Yeah. But after independence, it has to transform into social conscience. That is addressing the social needs of the people. Otherwise, as he says, the people feel cheated at the end when you get independence or whatnot. So national consciousness has to transform into social consciousness, into a program of actually, meeting the needs of people. But he says, and this watch this, Sonia. This is the thing that I missed until recently. He says you can't skip the national stage.
Ooh.
And he says that's one of the problems, and he talks about this. He says one of the problems you have with the younger generation, he talks it generationally. He has a great love for the younger generation,
right,
and whatnot. He has this famous statement. But he says the younger generation who hasn't lived through the revolution, through the national stage, and they just know the social policies that they get, they have no sense of the national unity of the country. And you get that through the national stage. So he says you can't skip the national stage. He says, yes, if you just get stuck at the national stage, then you end up with a problem. You end up in a cul-de-sac. He says a blind alley. Unless national consciousness is turned into social consciousness at independence, you end up in a blind alley. But then he warns, he says, you can't skip the national stage. I had this discussion with our friend Ken about this.
Yeah, that's a really.
Yeah, it's a dialectic. You can't. It's not a matter of what our preferences are and shit. It's what history is. I mean,
this is why I've always been deeply suspicious in Black folk who come to Marxism through white and multiracial organizations. They frighten me. They never went through a nationalist.
Right.
So they. Yeah. So.
Listen, I'll tell you this. I'll tell this real quick story to get you the sense of it. Riya used to tease me. Her and my friend Michael, they used to tease me. They said they were more Black cultural nationalists than I was. And so that's where I'm coming from, man. Riya was the one who told me. Riya told me, says, "Darling, because I was rather critical. I'd come out of Black arts movement and whatnot, and I saw a bunch of bullshit, a bunch of stuff, and with some of our friends and cultural nationalists. And so she said, no. She says, darling, you have to take Black studies very seriously. Black studies is, and Riya was the one who pushed me to really take a second look at Black Studies. She says, no, Black Studies is very, very important. It's the theoretical expression of the movement. And by the way, Riya went to the whole thing of creating, and nobody's really unpacked this, and I always wanted to go back. She saw that in the late 60s, early 70s, actually mid 60s to the late 60s, early 70s, she saw that the anti-colonial movement at the time of the civil rights turning into the Black Power movement, that there was the possibility of a Black international. See, other people were talking about the United States of Africa or whatever. She says, no, no, no. This is something, there's a possibility here in that moment of a Black international. It's still out there, undeveloped, but it's, there's something. And one of the things you were telling me about the other day, this brother got elected in Senegal. Who knows, man?
Hey, man, that brother was, that was empowering.
Yeah.
But look, we're coming toward an end. I like to go to 8:30 to keep my pack with the audience, but I do want you to comment on the AP course. Well, actually, I'm gonna give you an option. You can talk about the Black Arts course that you created that's online, or you can react to the College Board's AP course in African American Studies and speak to what are your thoughts on the course, and what are your thoughts on how Black scholar activists should engage if there are high schools in their area that have adopted the course?
Well, I think it's safer for me to talk about the Black Arts course, because I'm just beginning to talk with some of the folks over in Central about the AP African American. So we haven't had a meeting yet. We just had exchanged some emails. I think I'm supposed to have a meeting this week or next week. I forget now. So I'm going to find out from them what they're talking about. But what they're interested in is this Black Arts Today course that I created.
Talk about that.
The Black Arts Today course is a course that's offered by the College of Fine and Applied Arts at the University of Illinois. So it's coming out of the college. It's not coming out of any department. It came out of I was asked to do an assessment of Black arts in all of the 6 or 7 departments of the College of Fine and Applied Arts. And it took me less than
You got a department of dance,
art design, theater, music, architecture, landscape architecture, and my department, urban and regional planning, is in it. So I don't know, 7 departments, including architecture, landscape, and landscape architecture. So I went around and spoke to,
Isn't graphic arts in there with Stacey Rice?
Yeah, it's art and design. It's called
art and design. Okay.
Art and design, yeah. And John used to be in it.
Yeah.
And so
let's give John a shout out. John Jennings, one of the
John Jennings, great John Jennings.
Theorists at this moment.
Yeah, exactly. The Afrofuturism and speculative art, Black speculative. And so I did an assessment, an evaluation of Black arts in the college, the whole college, in all of the departments. And obviously it was a very abysmal assessment. So it was a very abysmal, but I went around and talked to Black faculty and some like Gabe Solis, who teach jazz and and so I talked to them and asked them about what they saw, what their assessment was of the departments, what they thought was needed, what courses in Black arts they were thinking of that I could help with and whatnot. So I got a lot of feedback and I wrote a report. And so one of the things that came out of it, the main thing that came out of it, was the creation of this course that took me 2 years to develop, called Black Arts Today, and a text that I wrote, an e-text that, you got to get a QR code to get the text.
But it accompanies the course.
Yeah, it's part of the course. So there's a Canvas site for the course, and then there is the e-text for the course. And students essentially can take it with their phone. So they don't have to worry about scheduling and whether it fits in their schedule. So
asynchronous.
Right, that's asynchronous. And I think we have 100 students this semester, and we're scaling up 25 each semester. Have 3 TAs for the course. Most of them come from arts departments in the college, and also from the College of Education.
So talk about the content and the pedagogy, the teaching strategies.
Well, some of the course, and I say the significant part of the course, comes from when I taught Intro to African American Studies. The stuff that I taught on art and culture. It also comes from when I taught Afro 224, humanistic perspectives in African American Studies, which was cross-listed with comparative world literature. So there was a lot of arts and the social sciences in that course as well. So some of it comes from there. I also used to, at another institution, I used to teach African history and culture at the College of DuPage for a couple years and whatnot. So I have that background, but mostly I come out of the Black arts movement back in the day, in the late 60s and early 70s, both in Washington, D.C. and in L.A. So I bring all of that to it as well. When we go through the Harlem Renaissance, pre-Harlem Renaissance, we go through the Chicago Renaissance.
When you say pre-Renaissance, you talking about the Renaissance in D.C.? What are you talking about?
What? Say that again?
In the 1890s, there's a African American cultural awakening in D.C.
Right.
That's located and rooted in D.C. Is that what you mean by the pre-Renaissance?
There's that. There was this brother. He was one of the people of the Niagara movement who wrote the first book on the first art history book by a Black person. It's published in 1890 something. He and his brothers owned a publishing company and published it. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name. It's been a long day, but it's one of the things that's pre kind of neoclassical art, and I think it's called Emancipation and Freedom, or Freedom and Emancipation, and it's about the various monuments in the United States that that portray Black emancipation and freedom. There's a lot. And this whole discussion about monuments and Civil War monuments and taking them down, there's a whole raft of freedom monuments and emancipation monuments to the Civil War around the country, made mostly by white sculptors and whatnot. But Edmonia Lewis, who is a famous Black, have some of her work in the book, and he has all these photographic plates of this stuff, including on the Capitol and whatnot. I mean, it's crazy. And there's all these Black monuments around the country. And this guy back in the 1890s was publishing. He was a friend of Du Bois, was part of the Niagara movement, and published it. So that was one of the first ones. So he kind of captured. But even before that, there's a guy by the name of Duncanson, who was a Black landscape artist in the 1850s. And this guy was considered, there was debate amongst art historians. This guy is considered by some the greatest landscape painter in the country.
Wow.
Yeah, most people don't even know about this guy. So we go back to the 1900s, but I also talk about, in terms of aesthetics, the role of race in the role of aesthetics in the creation of race as a category.
Unpack.
Huh?
Unpack.
Where does the term Caucasian come from? The term Caucasian comes from people from the Caucasus Mountains.
Caucasus Mountains, who actually aren't that pale.
That's right. But the thing is, Blumenbach, who comes up with the term Caucasian, who was an Enlightenment theorist, early anthropologist, before it had been solidified as a discipline, he creates these four categories of Caucasian. And he simply thought that, we have documented, evident course, that he thought that the people from the Caucasus Mountain were the most beautiful people he saw. It was an aesthetic. Yeah. It was an aesthetic. And so then you say, once you're into this aesthetic, then what do you make of the so-called Mongoloid or Mongolian or Asian? What do you make of the Negroid or African?
That gets back to Fanon.
That's exactly right.
of race. Yeah, absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
And so, I use the text from Negro to Savage by that brother who's Baker, who's an anthropologist,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
he
yeah,
talks
yeah.
about that in the 19th century, about the museums and how museums actually characterized and caricatured the Chicago Exposition. I mean,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
those kinds of things.
Now, Chicago Exposition, you mean the 1903
Right,
World Fair, the one that Ida B. Wells and Frederick Douglass protest.
right, right. But also, Du Bois's infographics that he
Yeah.
presents at the Paris 1900 exposition. That, by the way, was key to Pan-Africanism because Du Bois is invited through this brother who's working for the federal government. It was his brother who had been a student of Du Bois to mount this exhibit of his work. And his students create these beautiful infographics. It's really artistic.
There's been a book that has been
There's a new book. There's a book that's come out on it.
The infographics.
But Du Bois is going to Paris in 1900 to the Paris Exposition to do this exhibit. He stops off at London where Henry Sylvester Williams has the first Pan-African conference.
Right.
And Du Bois attends that as well. And Du Bois writes in a committee the letter to the world from that conference, in which he first uses the expression that the history of the 20th century is a history of the color line.
Yeah.
It comes from that 1900.
It's from that speech that he
That's
gave at the Pan-African Congress.
Right. And so, but the he's doing double duty. He's really on his way to Paris. But he comes back going home, and I think that's when he goes to the Pan-African Conference of Henry Sylvester Williams. So you have this beginning of this Pan-African, this organization, the organized expression of Pan-Africanism is on this trip that Du Bois makes in 1900. And there you see this beautiful artistic depiction of data, and so there's no separation between social science and history and the arts and whatnot. And people back then, they didn't, these things were together. You have the work of some of these artists, these visual artists during the Harlem Renaissance, doing these big murals at HBCUs and whatnot.
Eric Douglass is just okay, Lou. What I need to get some questions in. We're gonna run over a bit.
Okay.
Is that fine with you?
Yeah, it's fine for me, man.
Okay. Both of us are.
We're good. We're good.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, no doubt. But I got to get some questions in. One, from Breaking Ground, they say that the person that you're thinking about was Robert S. Duncanson. That he was a
Robert S. Duncanson, right?
Rivers. Okay, and that Joe Biden chose his 1859.
Right, they did
as the inaugural painting.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Now let me go up here to the question. So one question from Imran Makani, and the question is, what do you think the growth of national consciousness might come to look like for African Americans today? Are accurate genealogies prior to slavery possible and desirable? So it's two questions. What do you think the growth of national consciousness would look like amongst African Americans today? That's the first question.
Well, it's not a static thing. It changes over time. And it changes with the racial formation of the society. We certainly see elements of it in the Black Lives Matter movement or moment in response to George Floyd. It certainly was different than the national consciousness that we're familiar with before. But if you go back to the civil rights movement, it was pretty diverse and integrated. Black Power as a national consciousness moment, had a different articulation. So it changes. The thing that I think is key, however, and I think really determined the national consciousness of the Black Power movement, out of which I came, people don't realize, and I was lucky to be at Howard at the time, is that Black Power was a tremendous historical moment, and I would say historiographical moment, in that we went back and discovered all of this history.
Yeah.
I mean, who the hell knew who Richard Wright was? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, he was forgotten. He's got
right.
But it
He was writing in the 40s.
right. I mean, it was we discovered all of these stuff. Just the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, so we discovered all of these things, and we used it in a lot of different ways. I mean, frankly, Du Bois was rediscovered, and we see these recoveries, these rediscoveries all the time. And I mean, you see it today. I mean, in terms of, you know, what young people are interested in. Now, we can certainly criticize what they make of it, but there certainly is an interest in. I make a point in the class, the Black Arts class. If we had time, you should invite me. We can do. I can show you the film, because there's some secret stuff going on in the class.
All right. Well, I'm gonna bring you back soon.
Yeah,
I'm gonna bring you back in the early summer. But
one of the major themes in the class is Sankofa. So, and you know, beyond the event horizon, time exists all at once. Past, present, and future exist all at once, and that's what it's in there.
Two opposite things popped in my mind. The first thing that popped in my mind is the quote from Marx in the 18th Brumaire, where he says that the history of the past weighs on the mind of the present, and that they begin to remember chants and people from the past, and they draw on them as they prepare to go into battle today, right? Essentially, but then Vincent Harding in that film, Ella Baker, Vincent Harding is introducing Ella Baker, and he makes this argument that he's talking about civil rights and Black power. He said, we changed the U.S., and as the U.S. changed, we have to now change for the new environment that we created. And that's what I'm taking from
exactly right.
Two things.
Right. Yeah. And Fanon in the last chapter of Black Skin, White Mask, he has a frontis quote from Marx in 18th Brumaire. He says, you know, revolutions of the past drew their poetry. In the past, revolutions drew their poetry from the past. The revolution of today have to draw their poetry from the future.
Yeah.
But Fanon also said he didn't get into blueprints, nor did Marx. He says that Fanon says that the future has to be an edifice built by living men and women.
That's right.
So we can only bring you so far, but it's up to you to develop that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, here's a couple more questions. Breaking ground. Okay, let me move on fine.
Well, breaking ground kind of bum rush us.
Okay, here it is. Robert Brown goes straight to where most people go when you say Fanon, right? So the question is, Fanon wrote, violence is a cleansing force for the colonized. In our struggle for liberation, will Fanon's idea on violence as a cleansing force ever apply to Africans in America?
Sure, it did. I mean, I wrote for an encyclopedia that was edited by Jesse Carney Smith at Fisk University. I wrote the entry on Nat Turner, and I wrote the entry on Denmark Vesey. To be sure. I mean, you can also get into some adventurism with that stuff, as did happen in the late 70s and too. You know, and so but of course, but it came up as a debate. You know, our friend Akinyele deals with this in terms of armed struggle and whatnot. And it turns out I actually found that Fanon and Robert, what's the brother's name? Robert Negroes with Guns.
Williams. Robert F.
Williams. their paths crossed in that chapter 1 of Wretched of the Earth. Fanon talks about American Negroes who were starting gun clubs. And I think he saw. I think I narrowed it down that there was some kind of press conference that Williams did in North Carolina.
Oh, absolutely. This is after.
Yeah.
What's the black woman's name? Ruby something. She's got 3 children. This white dude breaks in her crib, rapes her, and then when they go to court, this cat don't show up. And his goddamn lawyer says, his wife is there, and he goes into this whole thing about this is a beautiful flower of the South, this beautiful pale, white woman, and then he turns to the black woman, Ruby something, and he says, why would he leave her for that?
Damn.
And Robert Williams, the women is in his ass. You got to do something. And that's when he comes out and says, we will meet violence with violence.
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we got a couple more questions.
By the way, I found the same phenomenon when I researched Nat Turner. It was the community that pushed Nat Turner because he retreated from it twice.
Yeah,
But it was the community that pushed him forward. So you got to do something. You've been organizing, and it was the community. So people think that a lot of times these individual acts are just the individual. Sometimes you get into that adventurism and only is the individuals. But the thing is when there's the connection between the individual and the revolution, between the community and the revolutionary, then we got something going. That was the thing. And so you're right. That thing about Robert Williams, that story really fits.
Yeah, no. So, okay, here's a question. This person wants you to do a quick summary of Notes of Dialectics by James, and someone else wants you to talk about Facing Reality. Now, those are 2 different moments in James. Can you do it in like 4 minutes?
Notes on Dialectics is James's reading of Hegel's Science of Logic. The basis of him writing the notes was the discovery of Lenin's philosophic notebooks on Hegel's Science of Logic. Riya was in the Library of Congress, read the Russian version because that's the only thing that existed, and gave notes on Lenin's notes on on Hegel's Science of Logic, and did an on-site translation from the Russian to English and sent them to James. Later on, several years later, and then James writes Notes on Dialectics in Nevada. It's also called the Nevada Document, in 1948. One can look at what he makes of the science of logic. In fact, Riya's, it wasn't a later critique, it was actually an observation at the time, because they continued the correspondence between Riya and Grace after Notes on Dialectics was written. And Riya observes that James put the greatest emphasis on contradiction from the science of logic.
Right.
Contradiction is kind of a mid-level category in the science of logic, whereas there are more advanced stages of the dialectic. And so it was an observation she made. And so James put a lot of his eggs in the basket of contradiction. It wasn't that it was wrong. It was
absolutely. I mean,
for instance, if you go up to the absolute idea is the unity of the theoretical and the practical idea. It's the unity of theory and practice. That's the highest level of it. But so this earlier mid-level had to do with contradiction. Of course, we struggle with the unity of theory and practice all the time, but it's all there in Hegel. He talks about the uniting the theory and practice, or the theoretical idea and the practical idea. But the Notes on Dialectics is really internally circulated within the Johnson Forest tendency. It's never published until much, much later. It was in the
I thought
70s.
it's published in the 80s, isn't it?
Yeah, it could have been.
Yeah.
But, so there is that.
Now go to facing reality.
Facing reality.
Historical moment. Tendency is broke.
Yeah, they do publish some documents from when the tendency was together in Facing Reality. To tell you the truth, I can't really. I mean, I read Facing Reality.
The Italian Marxists, we're trying to think about. He plays a role in the writing of Facing Reality.
Who does?
Costa.
A Greek guy.
Is he Greek?
Yeah. God, the hell was his name? You almost had it there. I forgot.
Yeah, no, I can't pull up anymore, man.
Yeah, the Greeks were pretty good. The Greeks and the Yugoslavians were pretty good. Raya and CLR and Grace were in touch with the Greeks and the Yugoslavs because they had broken from Stalinism, and so there was this attempt to even create a new international at the time with them. But yeah,
reality is a rejection of the Vanguard Party.
Oh yeah. Correspondence committees was anti-vanguardist. Johnson Forest tendency was anti-vanguardist. There's two things that characterize the Johnson Forest tendency. The one within the Workers' Party, the other one much more after the Workers' Party and gets expressed in Facing Reality. The two things are this. One, the independent nature of the Black struggle. There was a debate over the Negro question, as it was called. And
that's actually between the two books.
Right. So it was the independent nature of the Black struggle as against the Trotskyist notion, the Workers' Party notion, which, by the way, was not Trotsky's view, by the way. It was just crazy. But that the Workers' Party was trying to reduce the Black struggle to class struggle.
But wait a minute, you said it wasn't Trotsky's view?
No, it wasn't Trotsky's
debate.
No. When you read Trotsky's conversation with James, Trotsky is much better than James. Much better than James. James has just come from Europe. James don't know shit about the Black question.
You're right. You
don't know shit about it.
Trotsky is in advance of James.
In fact, Trotsky is saying, listen, the communists, the Stalinists are kicking our ass because they have the Black Belt thesis and, free to land. I mean, they have that view and whatnot. And so he says, well, what are we going to do? And so James comes up with, number one, the Black movement should follow the trade unions. The trade unions should be it. And number two, which is what the Europeans always come up with, well, the United States never created a workers' party, a labor party. That was James's view, and that's what Europeans say all the time about Americans. They never created a labor party, blah 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 blah. And so
that's American exceptionalism.
Yeah. So but you're right. So the other thing was the Johnson Forest tendency was anti-vanguardist. The Vanguard Party to lead. The only time Vanguard comes up for Raya, I don't know that this was the Johnson Forest position. Johnson Forest position was of an independent Black movement. That was their position. Raya, when she creates News and Letters with Charles Denby, the Black worker, first editor of the paper, she articulates in American Civilization on Trial, that 1963 pamphlet, in response to the 100th anniversary of Emancipation Proclamation, she calls Black mass movement the vanguard of the American Revolution. Yeah. So it moves from independent Black movement to the Black movement being the vanguard of the social movements in the United States. So that's the only time she uses vanguard, not Vanguard Party, but mass movement, the Black mass movement as a vanguard.
Okay, I'm looking for one last question.
Man, I gotta get overtime pay for this shit.
Yeah, you man.
You got to take me to sushi or something, man.
I know, man. Let's make sure we do sushi next week.
Okay,
Okay?
good.
Like next Thursday.
Okay,
Oh, wait a minute. No, I got a solid
whatever.
shit. We'll find a day, man.
Okay.
Well, no, we go back to our traditional Mondays.
Okay,
Okay, we'll do Mondays.
Tell people to come to Asala. I'm going to be presenting my class since Asala's theme is on Black arts.
Right. Okay, well, we got to talk. Gus putting together a panel. All right, so look, let me open. I'll find one last question and then we'll close this out.
Okay.
This is a kind of statement, and it's by Sith Lord, you know, as in Star Wars.
Yeah.
Okay, versus the Jedi. He says, I don't understand why we don't center Marxism out of Black Reconstruction. I take that to mean get rid of Marxism from Black radical analysis. How do you respond to that?
Then you end up with petty bourgeois Black nationalism.
And that leads us into
capitalism. I mean, and so what? We're going to
Black bourgeoisie that would roll
Black, Black entrepreneurs and millionaires, and that's where you end up with that.
Right.
So
Cornelius Castoriadis.
Yeah, Castoriadis.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was Greek. Yeah, they did that thing together.
Yeah, they did Facing Reality together. I thought Grace Lee had a hand in that.
Yeah, she did. She stayed with CLR for a while.
Working together. Yeah.
CLR had a great line though. He had this line called socialism looking at us out of every window. I mean, listen, man. The biggest secret in the world, the biggest secret in the world is that American society is so damn socialist, more socialist than the Soviet Union or China has ever been.
Wait, do you know who said that early 1877?
Who?
The first brother to join the Socialist Party. Peter Clark. Peter Clark had a whole speech where he talks about every drop of water, every time you take your ass to the park, the pavement of the roads.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The product of socialism. Oh, yeah.
Really?
Clark laid it down.
That's my boy.
Yeah. So, my brother, we done almost went to 9 o'clock. So we're going to shut it down. But here, do you have any last concluding comments, or you have any announcements that you want to make? And then we'll shut it down.
No, I think the dialogues like this need to go on. And I mean, I'm glad you have this live stream, I guess you call it live stream. I'm still getting used to the technology that you're into, but I think this is important. And I think, dialectics begins with dialogue. I mean, its origin in Greece was dialogue. And so it's a very important development. It's a way of honing ideas and debating ideas. I mean, I hope we can continue to do it. No, thanks for the opportunity, and I want to thank the people who took the time to tune into it, and I hope there was something that folks got from it, something they want to continue to work on.
Well, thank you, brother. And judging from the chat, people got a lot from it. Good. So we're gonna bring you back soon. So we can take this up, and let me say again, the most heartfelt way, thank you, and I'm paying for the sushi money.
Next time we got to do the dialectic proper.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna
see who can hang with that.
All right.
The algebra of revolution.
Okay, I'm gonna remove you, and let me get back to my brand.